Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Gittin. We are up to Perek Aleph Mishnah Hey. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai Eliyahu ben Burcha Israel, Chana bat Miriam, Sason ben Raya, and Yehoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen. And Avdi ben Chaim lechaim, v'derefuah shelemav, Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, betoch shah Cholei Israel. This Mishnah lists another law that is shared by Gittin and freedom documents for slaves, but not by other kinds of documents. This law involves the Kutim, a pagan group that converted to Judaism, but did not keep the mitzvot properly. The Kutim settled in Eretz Yisrael during the First Temple era. When they were attacked by lions, they converted to Judaism in the hope of being saved. However, even after their conversion, they kept some pagan beliefs and did not observe the mitzvot properly, as it records in the Book of Kings, Book 2, Chapter 17, verses 24 through 41. Tanaim dispute their status as Jews and their reliability regarding mitzvah observance, as the Gemara discusses in Masechet Kiddushin, page 75b. Now the Mishnah discusses whether they can serve as witnesses for legal documents. Kol get sheyesh alav ed kuti pasul. Any document. Now the word get here simply means document and does not refer specifically to a divorce document. Any document that has a signature of a kuti witness is invalid, because kutim generally do not observe the mitzvot properly and therefore cannot be trusted to be witnesses. Chutz mi Gittin Nashim b'shichure avadim. This is true for all documents except for Gittin of women and freedom documents of slaves, which are valid even if one of the witnesses is a kuti, provided that the other witness is an eligible Jew, because both witnesses of a get or freedom document must sign in each other's presence, and the Jew would not have signed together with the kuti had he not known that this particular kuti was a reliable witness. Now, although as a rule, kutim do not properly observe the mitzvot, the Tana of our Mishnah holds that they are legitimate Jews. Therefore, if a particular kuti is known to keep the mitzvot properly, he is a valid witness. The Mishnah refers to a case where the kuti's signature appears above the Jew's signature. The Jew would not have given the kuti the honor of signing before him if he did not know that this kuti observed the mitzvot properly. For documents other than Gittin, the two witnesses do not have to sign in each other's presence. Therefore, even if a Jew's signature appears along with or above the kuti's, the Jew might not have known that that kuti, and there is no evidence that he is a reliable witness, as the Gemara explains in Masechet Gittin, page 10b. Now, according to this opinion, even a get or freedom document is invalid if both of its witnesses are kutim, because in that case we do not know if the kutim are reliable. The Gemara on page 10b in Masechet Gittin teaches that the Mishnah is missing the following words, which must be inserted. However, Rabban Gamliel disagrees with the first Tana and approves a get or freedom document even when both its witnesses are kutim. The Mishnah then supports this statement, Maaseh sheviu lifnei Rabban Gamliel lechvar otnai. And it indeed happened that they brought before Rabban Gamliel and Kfar Odnai get isha vayu edav ede kutim, a woman's get on which both the witnesses were kutim, the ichshir, and Rabban Gamliel approved it. According to Rabban Gamliel, kutim are careful to observe the laws of Gittin and freedom documents and therefore may serve as witnesses for them. Rabban Gamliel holds that although the kutim do not properly observe all the mitzvot, there are some mitzvot that all kutim observe properly and they may be trusted regarding those mitzvot. One such mitzvah is the laws of Gittin. However, they were not known to be careful with regard to other documents and therefore not valid witnesses for other documents. Another law in which Gittin and freedom documents differ from other documents, Kol hashtarot ha'olim ba'arkot shel goyim, all documents that are processed in court of idolaters. Now this refers to courts set up by the government. The judge and witnesses in these courts are considered trustworthy as long as it is known that they do not take bribes. So all documents that are processed in courts of idolaters, even though the witnesses who signed them are idolaters, ksherim are valid, except for Gittin of women and freedom documents of slaves, which are valid only if they are signed by Jews and processed in a Jewish court. Since most documents simply record an event, for example, a loan document simply records the fact that one person lent another person money and as such serves as proof that the borrower owes money to the lender, the courts are trusted for that kind of process. However, Gittin and freedom documents actually bring into effect the divorce or the emancipation. Only a get processed in a Jewish court has the power to do this. The actual get or freedom document is what divorces the woman or frees a slave. Since by Torah law idolaters are not eligible witnesses, a document signed by them cannot accomplish this purpose regardless of their reliability. As the Rav and the Rambam in his commentary to the Mishnah explain. Now Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon says, Afelu ksherin, even these Gittin and freedom documents signed by idolaters are valid as long as they were given to the wife or slave in the presence of two valid Jewish witnesses. This ruling relates to a basic dispute about the witnesses on a get. All agree that a get must have two witnesses in order to be valid. However, there is a basic dispute about the type of witnesses it must have. Rabbi Meir holds that the get must be signed by eligible witnesses, what we call edei chatima karte. Rabbi Elazar maintains that the get does not need to be signed by witnesses at all. It must simply be given to the wife in front of two eligible witnesses, what we call edei misira karte. Rabbi Shimon follows Rabbi Elazar's opinion. Therefore, it does not matter if the get was signed by idolaters as long as it was delivered in front of two valid Jewish witnesses. Lo usku ela bizman shenasu be'ediot. These documents were not said to be invalid except when they were made privately. Continuing in Rabbi Shimon, these documents were not said to be invalid except when they were made privately by idolaters who are not judges. However, if they were done in a court of idolaters, according to Rabbi Shimon, they are valid. Although Rabbi Shimon holds that a get does not have to be signed by witnesses, it is usually signed by witnesses. This way, if its validity later comes into question and the witnesses who saw its delivery cannot be found, we can assume that since it was signed by valid witnesses, the rest of it was also done properly, meaning it was delivered in front of valid witnesses and therefore is valid. So accordingly, since the witnesses who signed the get can be used to authenticate it, if a get is signed by people who are disqualified to serve as witnesses, Rabbi Shimon agrees that it is invalid. Therefore, a get signed by private idolaters who are disqualified to be witnesses is not valid. However, if the get was done in a court of idolaters, it is valid, because when a matter is done in court, its details are publicly known, and people will know that the witnesses signed on it are not valid witnesses. Therefore, they will not authenticate the get based on their signatures. And the Rav does tell us, Rabbi Shimon, that Echad does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Now, continuing with Mishnah Vav. A divorce does not take effect until the wife acquires the get. Usually, this happens when she receives it. However, if she appoints an agent to accept the get on her behalf, she acquires it as soon as her agent accepts it, and the divorce takes effect then. The same applies to slaves with regard to their freedom documents. This Mishnah cites a dispute whether someone can acquire a document on behalf of a wife or slave without their consent. Now, as a rule, a person can acquire something on behalf of someone else without the person's knowledge or consent, but only if that thing is clearly beneficial for the recipient. For example, Reuven can pick up an object with the intention of acquiring it for Shimon. Shimon thereby acquires it at that time, even though he knows nothing about it. However, if acquiring that object causes a disadvantage for Shimon, he cannot acquire it without his consent. Therefore, whether the agent can acquire the get or freedom document on behalf of the wife or slave depends on whether being divorced or freed is clearly beneficial. The Mishnah begins, if someone says to an agent, give this get to my wife, meaning accept this get on behalf of my wife. The Gemara on page 11b, Masechet Gittin explains that when someone says, give this get to my wife, he means for the agent to accept it on the wife's behalf and not merely to deliver it to her. However, since the wife did not give her consent, the agent can accept it on her behalf only if it is clearly beneficial for her. Or again, give this freedom document to my slave, meaning accept this document on behalf of my slave. If the husband or master wants to change his mind about either of them before the wife or slave receives it, he can change his mind. Since a divorced wife and a freed slave lose the financial support of their husband or master, divorce and freedom cannot be considered a complete benefit. Therefore, the agent cannot acquire the document for the wife or slave, and the divorce or emancipation cannot take effect until they personally receive the document. Until then, the husband or master can change his mind. Diva Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Now the sages disagree, but the sages say, Nashim, avadim. This is true for a woman's get, but not for a slave's freedom document. Because one can benefit a person even when he is not present to agree to accept that benefit. But one cannot disadvantage a person except when he is present to agree to accept the disadvantage. According to the sages, although it is not a complete benefit for a woman to be divorced, it is a complete benefit for a slave to be freed, as the Mishnah will explain. Therefore, while the agent cannot accept the get on his wife's behalf, he can accept the freedom document on the behalf of the slave. In that case, the slave becomes free right away, and the master can no longer change his mind. And the Rav does tell us, the Halacha does follow the opinion of the sages. Now the Mishnah explains why in the sages' opinion it is considered a complete benefit for a slave to be freed, but not for a woman to be divorced. If Even though a slave loses his master's support by becoming free, if a master chooses not to support his slave, he has the right to do so. Although a master usually supports his slave, he has the right to refuse to provide food and force the slave to beg for charity. Since the master can stop supporting the slave at any time, even without freeing him, losing support is not considered a real disadvantage. However, a woman loses by getting divorced because if a husband chooses not to support his wife, he does not have the right to withhold her support, but is required to feed her. So getting divorced is a disadvantage for her, since she will lose her husband's support. Now Rabbi Meir, who ruled that a slave's freedom is not a benefit, argues in favor of his ruling. Amar lahem. Rabbi Meir said to the sages, surely you must agree that if he is the slave of a Kohen, his freedom contains a disadvantage. Because the Kohen disqualifies his slave from eating tirumah by freeing him, just as he disqualifies his wife from eating tirumah by divorcing her. Now we know tirumah is the first of several portions that must be removed from produce grown in Eretz Yisrael. It must be given to a Kohen and may be eaten only by a Kohen and his household members, which includes his wife, and cannot eat slaves. So if a Kohen frees his slave or divorces his wife who is a non-Kohen, they may no longer eat tirumah. Since his freedom costs a slave the privilege of eating tirumah, it is not completely beneficial for him. So even though he becomes a free man, which is surely a benefit, since the freedom contains an element of disadvantage, it should not be able to be done without his consent. Now the Gemara in Masechet Gittin, page 13a, explains that in truth, Rabbi Meir holds that freedom contains a disadvantage not only for the slave of a Kohen, but for any slave for a different reason. When a slave is freed, he becomes a full-fledged Jew, and therefore becomes forbidden to sleep with a female slave who was permitted to him while he was a slave. It is assumed that a slave considers this a disadvantage. The sages disagree with Rabbi Meir and maintain that this is outweighed by the benefit that as a full-fledged Jew, he is now permitted to marry a Jewish girl. Rabbi Meir argues here that the sages should agree that at the very least, the slave of a Kohen is a disadvantage by becoming free. Amrulo, the sages responded to Rabbi Meir, the slave is able to eat tirumah only because he has the Kohen's property. The Kohen can sell him to a non-Kohen and he would lose the right to eat tirumah, although he would remain a slave. Since he could lose this right at any time, its loss is not considered a real disadvantage. The Mishnah cites another law in which Gittin and freedom documents are different from other matters. Here a man told the group of people to bring a get to his wife or a freedom document to his slave, but did not intend for any of them to acquire it on behalf of the wife or slave. If someone says to a group of people, give this get to my wife or give this freedom document to my slave, now since he gave his request to a group and did not give the document to a specific person, he did not intend for someone to accept the get on his wife's behalf, but simply intended for the people to ensure that his wife received it. Vamet, and he dies before they receive the documents. The agent should not give the get or freedom document after his death, because his wife and slave lost their bond with him automatically as soon as he died. His wife already became a widow, and a divorce can no longer have any effect on her. The fact that she is a widow and not a divorcee means that she is permitted to marry a Kohen, who is forbidden to marry a divorcee. And in addition, if she was a widow and her husband was childless, she would have to marry his brother in Yibum or be released from that requirement through the Chalitza ceremony. As a divorcee, she is exempt from that requirement. Now, as for the slave, he now belongs to the dead man's heirs and cannot be freed by a freedom document written by the dead man, who is no longer his master. Tenum manel ish ploni vamet. However, if a person said to a group of people, give a maneh 100 dinars to so-and-so, and he died before that person received the money, they should give the money after his death to that person. This refers to a case where the person gave the instruction while on his deathbed. The rabbis decreed that a gift promised by a dying man takes effect automatically when he dies. Therefore, the person to whom he said to give the money automatically acquires it, and it must be given to him. That is, Rabotayev, today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.